So what's up, people? This is Robert BASSANO. For those who've heard my videos, heard me speak, I have a 2-year-old son, Nico. I love him to death, man. He's become my best friend. He's become my new eyes, my fresh eyes, my revised eyes on reality and the future. So I'm dedicating this video to my son, who will one day review this video and hear his daddy speaking, talking about a subject that he will grow to understand is very important to his growth, his understanding, and development. So I will never lie to him. Never. My wife and I don't even play games to try to deceive him or trick him into anything. We don't even play hide or go seek. It's a typical game every parent plays with their child. Why would you want to play games of deception, misdirection, misinformation with a child? Why would you want to start them on that path? Now, this is not a judgment on new parents out there. This is not a criticism against any other parents. It's just, I see things in a different filter perspective that is not clouded or manufactured to lead me to believe what you say what is really is not. So I'm going to read this book that I found. I'm going to read some excerpts from it, and it'll probably be an hour long or so. And there might be part 2, part 3, part 4, depending on how far we can get into the literature. But as you guys all know, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And here I go again, showing you textual, documented proof. Now, I'm going to develop the natural presumption that in 1929, the level of deception, denial, propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation was not as prevalent in the public domain and mainstream media and public society as it is today. Of course, looking at Friedrich Nietzsche's quote, sometimes people don't want to hear the truth because they don't want their illusions destroyed. There's a remote possibility that propaganda was so robust and such a paramount part of development and growth of society that everything that they were told back in the 20s was a lie. But for argument's sake, we're going to assume that this study was pure. As pure as it could possibly be. Now, some of you who are going to look at this data as I look at it, read it as I read it, you're going to automatically assume, okay, this is a piece of literature. This is a research study that was conducted to begin work on development of propaganda and psychological operations campaigns. And they wanted to use children as an experiment. I'll let you decide that for yourself. But what I want to focus on is some key things that were said by these children when they were asked about the sun and moon, construct, design, and function of the earth we live in and on. I think you will find that interesting. So why don't we begin? So I downloaded a book from offline, and some of you are just going to have to go find it for yourselves. I'm not getting paid to do the homework for you. You need to use your own personal initiative and effort to go find it. It's Northwestern University in Boston. It's Northwestern University Library. And let's be careful where we go through this here so that I can make sure all of the pages, everything is, I'm going to go through all of this. So these pages need to load. Okay. So we have here International Library of Psychology, Philosophy and Scientific Method. The Child's Conception of the World. Now, what's interesting is that this book was written around the same time John Abizaid's book on the enlightenment of the world was published. So that's not a coincidence. So there was some really serious studies and research and analysis being conducted back in the 1920s on the earth, on the world we live in. And this book, as you see the title, The Child's Conception of the World. Okay, let's keep going here, keep going. Gotta give it a chance. This is a big file, it's 416 pages. So, The Child's Conceptions of the World by Jean Piaget. He's got a PhD. He had a PhD. He was the director of the Institute of Result, professor at the University of Geneva, author of Language and Thought of the Child, and the Judgment and Reasoning in the Child. Okay? London. Let you guys all see this so you can get it for yourself. First published in England, 1929. It's been reprinted at least 5 times. Okay? Students and former students of J.J. Rousseau Institute who collaborated in this work. Okay? This information here is moot, but you know, you might want to look at some data. Maybe you can find something out there that some of these other students might have done talking about the flat earth. Okay? Alright, let's see what we got here. Okay, contents. Introduction, problems and methods. Methods of tests, pure observation, the clinical method, the 5 types of reaction revealed by clinical examination, rules and criteria for the diagnosis of the procedure types of reaction, and rules for interpretation of the results. Part 1 involves realism. The notion of thought. The first stage, thinking, is with the mouth, looking and seeing. The second and third stages, thinking is with the head, words and things. Nominal reasoning, realism, the origin of names, the place of names, the intrinsic value of names. Dreams, the first stage, the dream comes from outside and remains external. The second stage, the dream arises in us, ourselves, but is external to us. The third stage, the dream is internal and of internal origin. Realism and the origin of the idea of participation. Realism in the consciousness of self, the participation in magical practices, the origins of participation in magic as manifested in the child, corroborative proof, spontaneous magical ideas in the adult, conclusion, logical and ontological egocentricity. Contents. Chapter 5. Consciousness attributed to things. Let's keep going. Chapter 6. The concept of life. Chapter 7. The origins of child animism, moral necessity, and physical determinism. Part 3. The origin of the sun and moon. We're going to jump right to this. Okay? We're going to jump right to this section, page 256. And then we're going to move on to chapter 9, meteorology and the origin of water. And then from there, we're going to jump, let's see, okay, we'll do those two. And hopefully we have the time to jump. So we'll go 256 all the way through to 326, okay? Let's go. Let's go. So let's do this. Let me go 256. All right. So that's actually 242. We went through a lot of introductions. Just let these pages load. Very big document, people. Very big document. 245. So we need to jump probably another 10 pages, right? So let's go to page 268. Okay, 254. 255. 256. Here we go. So, now I've read through this portion of it, but there's a particular section I want to go through because a lot of this is just a lot of verbose, textual, I'm not going to say nonsense, but it's a bit boring for this video. If you can find a book, you can just make it a tasking of your own and read it for yourself, okay? So I'm going to jump to this section. And let's go here. Children's questions indicate a real interest on their part in the sun and the stars. And the very form in which they put the questions points to the nature of the solution which they themselves are inclined to favor. This point must be briefly examined, for it is very important not to corrupt the child's natural tendencies by means of inept tests. It is only necessary to glance through a list of questions put by children from age 3 to 5 to find examples like this. Fran, okay, 2-5, asks, who made the sun? The very form of this question is artificialist. Stanley Hall quotes the following examples. At 5 years of age, okay, that's the child's name. At 5 years of age, why is there a moon? At 3.5 years, what makes the sun shine? And who is it put the stars in the sky at night? At 5 years, who is it makes the stars twinkle? These are questions that 3 and 5 years olds begin to ask. Very inquisitive, okay? And if you're an adult, you're a mother or father, you have nieces and nephews, grandchildren, instead you pull out the Bible or the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita or the I Ching or any other religious book or some cockamamie science textbook that your child brought home from school that you yourself can't even verify who put it together and why it is they believe and why it is you believe what you believe based on what you were taught when you go to school. I'm telling you here right now, people, you better have a very clear, succinct, and concise explanation. It doesn't need to be definitive, but it needs to be clear enough and simple enough where a 3 to 5 year old who's going to ask you this question, you can give them a gambit of choices, ideas, constructs to consider that can be compared to the information they're going to learn in school. Because they're not learning in school. They're collecting data to develop their own cognitive critical analysis on what is fact and what is fiction. And these questions, as simple as they may be, what makes the sun shine? If you can't explain that to a child, 3 to 5 years old, then you yourself need to know everything that's in this book. You need to get back to learning like a child. And that's what we're trying to do in this whole entire effort, right? Is to educate those who are scientifically, technically, textually, academically illiterate. Not stupid, not ignorant, but illiterate. Because the things they're being taught are not being taught in a manner that brings them back to the genesis of all things that are, will be, and can become. Let's move on. Furthermore, spontaneous interest in the phases of the moon is to be noticed, which we shall see is related to artificialism. At 5 years, quote, why isn't the moon round when it is sometimes? At 9 years, why isn't the moon always the same shape? Why is it big sometimes and little at others? And, quote, what's the moon made of? It's a 5-year-old child, a 9-year-old child asking, what is the moon made of? NASA doesn't even know what the moon is made of, with $19 billion budget. So do you think you can tell your child what the moon is made of without looking in a textbook? You should be able to, but none of us can. And you should feel no shame in admitting to your child, as I do to mine, and I will do to my son, once he is 5 years old, 9 years old, and if he asks me this question, Daddy, what's the moon made of? Nico, Daddy doesn't have an idea. Well, why not, Daddy? I just don't know. I haven't been there, neither has anyone else. Really, Daddy? Nobody's been to the moon? No. No human being has ever been to the moon. Go watch Daddy's video on the fake Apollo moon landings. You'll get a good laugh out of it. Think about what you're doing, people. Just think about it. It is clear enough from these questions that there is a tendency to consider the sun and the moon as being made by somebody, and to find an originating cause for their activities. The same thing is apparent in the following instance. And they use a case, an example, okay? De Estrella, one of the deaf mutes quoted by W. James, recounts how he thought that the sun was a ball of fire. At first he thought there were lots of suns, one for each day. He did not understand how they could rise or set. One evening he happened to see some boys who were throwing up and catching string balls which had been dipped in oil and lighted. This made him think of the sun, and he decided that it must have been thrown up and caught in the same manner. But by whom? Then he supposed that there must be a tremendously strong man hidden in some way behind the mountains. The town of San Francisco is surrounded by mountains. The sun was a ball of fire with which he played, throwing it up very high in the sky every morning and catching it again every evening. He supposed that God, i.e. the very strong man, lit the stars for his own use, just as we light the gas. When allowance has been made for the logical form which De Estrella gives his recollections, they correspond in a striking degree to the replies which we are about to analyze. What, in short, we have to do is to make the questions we put to the children correspond to a certain extent with some of the spontaneous questions which they themselves ask. But if the results are too convincing, we must do still more. We must establish the replies given to our questions at different ages a continuous development, and this development must itself follow a definitively marked curve or gradation. This is precisely what the facts do show. Okay, let's go to some more questions that these children ask, because I'm not going to go through word for word, okay? So let's go to Roy, 6 years old. This is what Roy says. Let's make it bigger. How did the sun begin? And this is what the child says. It was when life began. Next question to the child. Has there always been a sun? The child answers, no. How did it begin? The child says, Roy says, because it knew that life had begun. What is it made of? Roy, of fire. But how? Roy, because there was fire up there. Where did the fire come from? Roy, from the sky. How was the fire made in the sky? Roy, it was lighted with a match. Where did it come from, this match? God threw it away. After a moment's pause, what is life? Roy, it is when one is alive. What made life begin? We did, when we started living. Wow. 6 years old. What made life begin? We did, when we started living. Now, for people who may be developing their own interpretation of what that actually means, from a 9-year-old, okay, from an adult perspective, my personal perspective, when this 9-year-old boy says, we did, when we started living, what he's saying to me is that we willed ourselves into existence. We willed ourselves into existence and started living. This child, of course, yes, says God threw it away. But to me, he's saying, okay, there was some creator who created the entire world we live in. But then after he created the world, he left. He's gone. And we willed ourselves into existence and started living. Some of you have your own different interpretation. Feel free, make comments. If it's vulgar, if it's idiotic, if it's non-succinct, inconclusive, disrespectful, not only am I going to block you, but I'm going to delete your comment. And I'm going to delete every other comment you're going to make creating another profile. Because this is for children to read. And if you want to be a child, you're going to behave yourself. Just as I am reading to all of you. Okay, let's move on. Then after another interval, and in connection with the 4 quarters of the moon, Roy said, the moon has become a whole one. How? Because it's grown. How does the moon grow, Roy? Because it gets bigger. How does that come about, Roy? Because we get bigger. Parce que nos on granit. What makes it get bigger? It's the clouds. Roy said a little easier that it is the clouds which cut the moon and make it into a crescent. It is the clouds which have cut it. What do? They help it to grow. How did the moon begin? Because we began to be alive. What did that do? Let's backtrack. He was asked, how did the moon begin? He says, because we began to be alive. Now, let me get off into an advanced level of thinking with regard to quantum science. And what I want to discuss right now is the fact that it is of my belief that the multiplication of human life, which also possesses its own electromagnetic field, a conscience, that the collective consciousness of human life brought about construct, design, and creation of many of the things that we see in everyday life, and could potentially manifest by what we see in a telescope or with our own eyes in the nighttime sky. So I want you to just think about that, ponder that for a second, based on what this child said, because we began to be alive. What did that do, Roy? It made the moon get bigger. Is the moon alive? No. Yes. Why? Because we are alive. How was it made? Because we were made. And that makes the moon get bigger, Roy? Yes. How? Why? It is the clouds that have made it get bigger. Is the sun alive, Roy? Yes. Why? Because we are alive. Does it know when it's day? Yes. How, Roy? It can see that it's day. 3 weeks later, we saw Roy again and made sure that he had forgotten that we had previously talked about. How did the sun begin, Roy? With fire. Where did it come from? From a match. How did the sun get big? Because we get big. Who makes the sun get big? The clouds. And we? It's because we eat. Does the sun eat? No. How do the clouds make the sun bigger? Because the clouds get bigger too. Whoa. Now, this kid's in the realm of photonics. Light reflection, refraction. What do the clouds do that we know of today? What do chemtrails? What's the purpose of chemtrails? To release certain types of reflective particulates in the sky. Clouds are created, and then the proposed projected light from the sun reflects off of those clouds, giving us the appearance of what? That it's a distant sun or a close sun. Again, something else to ponder. And how did the moon begin? With fire too. Whoa. Wait a minute. And how did the moon begin? Roy says, with fire too. With fire too. How did it get bigger? Just like we get bigger. Why did it get bigger? Because the clouds made it get bigger? So you see how the clouds are playing a regular theme in this whole thing, people? He's saying that the clouds get bigger, make the sun and the moon get bigger. Now, that could be interpreted as that the elliptical orbit that the sun and moon take, where they're distant in the winter. No, they're distant in the summer, closer in the winter, vice versa. If there were no clouds with the moon, would the moon get bigger then? No. Yes. All the same, it would be able to, just like we do. So you're saying without the clouds, the sun and the moon would get bigger, which could be taken as being true. This case is worth studying closely because it shows extremely clear how artificialism and animism arise simultaneously out of the primitive participations that the child establishes between things and man. Let's go on. So let's read some of these other questions. In order to understand Roy's statements, it should be noted that in other conversations, Roy has said, this is what he said: A, it is the clouds which make the wind and vice versa. B, we are ourselves full of wind, which has at the same time something to do with the clouds. It is this wind which makes us get bigger. Wow. Wow. It's a 9-year-old kid saying this. C, in its origins, the wind has come from men. It is somebody who blew. One can distinguish here a system of participations. Okay, let's continue on. So there's some bias in here with these researchers. I'm reading here right now. Because they say here the myth is in fact more or less an effort of invention. Roy made up the myth when pressed to define the origins, but his spontaneous thought was satisfied with a much vaguer relation between the sun and the moon, sun and man. This relation amounted to no more than this, that man is coming to life thereby provoked the same sort of activity in the sun and the moon. This does not constitute an idea that the sun was actually made by man. It simply indicates participation between them, and it was only when Roy was asked to define this participation more exactly that he had recourse to frank artificialism, that is, to the myth of their origin in human construction. Now this study is similar to the other video I put out previously. And what these researchers are doing is, I'm going to assume that they told this kid that he created this in his head, and that's not true. That there's no way that man could have created the sun and moon. But it seems to me they didn't want to give this kid a chance. They didn't want to give themselves a chance to even consider this as a possibility, a probability, a plausibility. You see, what happened here in 1929 is that they knew just as little as we do, maybe even less. there was a remote possibility there were a group of people who knew more, but that information was suppressed, kept hidden, so as to not to reveal this to children to support any of their own individual ideology, that there could be a probability and possibility that in ancient peoples had some sort of advanced technological capability to recreate the appearance of a sun and a moon. Because just as I said in one of my videos regarding Ale, they can create artificial stars, shooting stars, distant stars, and the sun. You just pay them $9,035 per sun, per star, and you have your own celestial show anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world. Okay, so let's go on here. All of this is consistent with the videos I put up. Let's see here. Let's see. So we can get to some other questions here from these children. Let's keep going here. Let's keep going. Stand by. Okay, let's see what we got here. Here's something interesting, page 263. The sun, moon, clouds, etc. were brought into being by the appearance of man. It is man's growth which stimulates growth in things, etc. Here actually lies the difference between participations of the artificialist type and those of the animist type. Though they are different, they are not contradictory but complementary. Artificialism is then, in its simplest form, the tendency to believe that human beings control the creation and the conduct of other beings which are regarded as being in some degree alive and conscious. But here, as in animism, when the child is invited to be precise, he invents a myth. You see, children, they are the purest thought, intent, and expression. How is it that we've seen 2 studies conducted on children when asked about the construct, design, and shape of the earth, if it's not consistent with the Copernican heliocentric model of a basketball, a bowling ball, a baseball, a perfectly spherical object in circumference and diameter? You have these PhDs and researchers saying, well, that's a myth. So in fact, what I said in the beginning needs to be retracted. The indoctrination to accept the Copernican model of the design of the Earth system goes all the way back to 1929, before we even considered launching any rockets. We even thinking about trying to get into space. You can see it here for yourself. This is incredible. Incredible. The first stage, the sun and the moon are made artificially. Roy's case has led us to a certain hypothesis which will serve as the main thread in our research. In the following more developed cases, the artificialist myths stand out more clearly from the primitive participations. Per 8 years old. What is a crescent? Croissant de lune. The moon has cut itself up. How? Does it cut itself up, or is it something else that does it? Per says, it is the moon that does it. On purpose? No. It is when it is born. It is quite small. Why? It can't be big at first. It's like us when we are little babies. it does just the same. When there's a crescent, is it always the same moon? Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's another. Let me say that again. When there's a crescent, is it always the same moon? Singular. Sometimes versus sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's another. This is clearly identification of more than one moon, people. More than one moon. I identified that in the latest video I uploaded, giving you guys kind of a preemptive notification that I'm going to be putting out expensive 3D computer generated high definition video to show you that myself and my team can create the same thing NASA can create for less money, but we can make it look even more real than they do. Let's go. Why is it cut up? So as to be able to shine in more than one place. Second identification of more than one moon. It cuts itself up in order to shine at the same time in different places. They're saying the moon dissects itself. It's able to compartmentalize itself to be in more than one location. Where does it come from? From the sky. How did it begin? It came from heaven. It was born from God. And the sun? It was born from God too. Jacob, 6.5, believes that the sun is of fire. How did it begin? It was quite tiny. Where does it come from? From heaven. How did it begin in the sky? Always getting bigger. Jacob says that the sun is alive and conscious. It has grown like a living thing. It was made by human beings. This is what Jacob says. This is what Jacob says. It was made by human beings. God, 6 years old. Why is the moon? What is the moon like? Round. Sometimes there is only half of it. Why is there only half of it? Because that is how it starts. Why? Because there is a lot of daylight. He means that the moon remains small during the day and only grows at night. Maybe they asked them to clarify it, who knows? Where's the other half? That's because it's not finished, not absolutely finished. What does it make itself like? Round. How does it begin? Quite small. Then it keeps on getting bigger. Where does it come from? From heaven. How does it make itself? Quite tiny. Does it make itself all alone? No, God does it. How? With his hands. God adds that the moon is alive and conscious, just like the sun. Wow. It deliberately follows us about, etc. The sun is equally alive and has been made. Mark, 10 years old, backward, is a very curious case because of his effective reactions. He says about the sun, quote, "It used to be quite small, then it got big." He assigns life and consciousness to it, but to the question, where does it come from, he is seized with embarrassment, blushes violently, turns his head away, and finally, in great discomfort, says that the sun comes from the person who has made it come. What do you mean? They ask. From the person who made it. Who was he? A man? Yes. Was it really a man or was it God? Oh, God or a man or someone. I love this kid. God, I don't care. I don't know who it came from. God, a man, somebody. The cause for this embarrassment is certainly not to be found in the difficulty of the problem, for it was clear that Mark had a solution in his mind, but it was one which he shrank from confessing. It was no sort of religious compunction, for during the whole conversation, Mark was, without systematic preference, ready to regard God or man indifferently as the author of any particular phenomenon. The only explanation of his embarrassment is that he is upset when he is spoken to about birth. He must have been told that everything to do with birth is taboo, and that the questions concerning the son seemed to him of a shocking nature. For this reason, it was not possible to proceed further with his examination. Such a case shows how intimately animism and artificialism may be connected. The following children, on the contrary, try to define the manner in which the manufacture took place, though sometimes this manufacture is still defined with a birth. Also, as we shall see, the children continue to consider the sun and the moon as being alive and conscious. Animistic and artificialist tendencies are still complementary to each other. Good. How did the sun start? With heat. What heat? From the fire. Where's the fire? In heaven. How did it start? God lit it with wood and coal. Where did he get the wood and coal? He made it. How did the fire make the sun? The fire is the sun. Up to now, it seems that God is no longer animistic, but that is not so. Does the sun see us? No. Does it feel the heat? Yes. Does it see at night? No. Does it see in the day? Yes, of course. It sees because it makes the light for itself. Fran, 9 years old. How did the sun begin? It was a big ball. How did it begin? By getting bigger and bigger, and then afterwards they told it to go up in the air. A helium balloon sun. And the reason why I say helium is because that's what the sun is mostly made of. Helium and hydrogen. A giant damn balloon that you pump full of helium and hydrogen and send it up into the air. This girl may have seen something that allowed her to associate that's exactly how the sun came about. She saw the military lifting balloons up in the air to conduct reconnaissance and surveillance and checking the weather like we still do to this very day. Way to go, Fran. Where did this ball come from? I think it is a great stone. I believe it is made of a great ball of it. Are you sure of all that? Yeah, sure. How did it get made? They made it into a big ball. Who did? Some men. Way to go, Fran. I love you, girl. I love you, Franny. I wonder if this is a Fran who's part of the Flat Earth now. Probably not. She can't be that old. Or maybe she is, and she's got a youth secret that she's not telling the rest of us because she looks fantastic. At the same time, Fran thinks that the sun sees us and deliberately follows us. On the other hand, the identification of the sun with a stone is not contradictory with the assertion that the sun has grown, for we shall see that a great number of children believe that the stones grow in the earth. Here again are artificialism and animism closely related. As to the moon, Fran, like many other children, believes that it is the same object as the sun, but that on account of the night, it loses its brightness. The moon is the sun. But when it is dark, there can't be any sunshine. It is true that the moon is bigger, but that is because it has to brighten up the darkness. It has to be bigger because very often people come home in the dark, and then the sun, the moon, shines. Deb, 9 years old. How did the sun start? With matches. How did that make the sun? From the flames. Where did the matches come from? From home. Nonetheless, he believes the sun to be living and conscious. Gaul, 5 years old, was born in 1918. 1918. I think these numbers, forgive me and correct me, people, maybe these numbers are the age. You say he was born in 1980, which perhaps has some bearing on his cosmogony. Where did the sun come from? It came in the war. How did it begin? When the war ended. War? War? This kid was born in 1918. He said the sun came in the war. What war? Gotta look into that one. I don't want to move away from the video though. How did it begin? When the war ended. Has there always been a sun? No. How did it begin? A little ball came, and then it grew big. Where did this little ball come from? From the fire? Here's a case which is intermediate between the last cases and those of the second stage, in the sense that the child begins to perceive the possibility that the sun and moon may have come from the clouds, but in particular aspects the idea becomes swamped by considerations like those in the preceding cases. Hub, 6.5 years old. Has the sun always been there? No, it began. How? With fire. How did that start? With a match. How? It was lighted. How did that happen? By striking the match. Who struck it? A man. What was his name? I don't know. The moon was made in heaven, that is to say, in the clouds. How were the clouds able to make the moon? Because it is lighted. What is? The cloud. How? With fire. Where did this fire come from? From the match. What lit it? A bit of stick with a real thing at the end? A red thing at the end? Hub is thinking here of the rockets, solid on gala nights. The moon for him is a cloud set alight by rockets fired off by people. The origin of the clouds also is artificial. Where do the clouds come from? From the sky. How did they start? In smoke. Where does the smoke come from? From stoves. Does smoke make the moons then? Yes. Okay. This guy's parents clearly haven't been wanting to spend any time with him at all. He's just basically learning on the fly based on what he sees, what he experiences, and then starts to take all of this and put it together and to say, okay, if I can see this and I see people doing this, then there must be people up in the sky who put all this stuff up in the sky that I see. So I feel bad for this kid. That's what happens when you don't spend time with your children. Teach them anything. Jack, 6.5, supposes that the stars are on fire and that they are made by people. Gian, 8.5, the stars are to show what the weather will be like. If there are stars, it is going to be fine. When there are none, it is going to rain. Whoa, this kid 8.5 years old, man, getting into meteorology. If there are stars, it is going to be fine. When there are none, it is going to rain. That is cool to know. I just learned something from an 8.5-year-old kid back in 1829. We gotta test that theory, people. If you don't see any stars in the nighttime sky the night prior, let me know if it rains the next day. If there are stars, then the weather's gonna be fine. Where does this light come from? It is the lamp posts outside which light them up, which makes them come. How did they start? The man made them. Do they know that they are shining? Yes. Fran. Let's back to Franny. People took little stones and made them into little stars. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because they're saying planets are just nothing but just giant rocks, right? Grange, 7.5. What are the stars? Round things. Made out of what? Made out of fire. It is God who made them. The reason for this artificialism lies evidently in the finalistic attitude which makes all children believe that the function of the stars is to indicate the weather. They serve to show if it will be fine tomorrow. Called 9 years old. What are the stars? They are to show if the next day will be fine. Wow, man. This is crazy. I'm going to need to read this whole book, for sure. For sure I'm going to need to read this whole entire book. But we need to get to another section, people. I wanted to get to the meteorological section, where we could read what they say, the second stage, the Sun and first partly. stand by, people. So what I'm going to do, people, I'm going to end it there, and I'm going to look into this textbook a little bit more to find some sections that provide support for all of our claims. I'm not going to be biased. I'm going to read other data that may go against, what we've already stated and claimed and assessed. But we need to be fair, okay? We know we believe. We're not trying to prove someone else's belief. We're working to prove our own beliefs. And it's up to those who don't believe what we believe to show us information to the contrary that's just as valid, just as serious, just as credible, and just as viable, so that we can conduct a comparative analysis to decipher which could be more probable, plausible, and viable in reality. Because a ball is not reality. Okay? And if you don't grab a hold of your children now, at an early age, to expose them to the possibility of an alternative construct that is based on actual physical application, which has been agreed upon by the international community with regard to the flat earth model, sciences and mathematics when it comes to telecommunications, signal propagation, electromagnetic wave propagation, aerodynamics, aeronautics, all of the sciences, then you're going to end up hearing this from your child. Another quote by Friedrich Nietzsche: "I'm not upset that you lied to me. I'm upset that from now on, I can't believe you, Mommy and Daddy." I'm not saying that this could be the catalytic cause to why children go off on their own and get involved in cults and gangs and other types of nefarious and, how should I say this, activities that are not good for their health or their psychological well-being. But if you start playing hide and go seek with your child now and telling them it's going to be okay if they hit their head or they get injured, well, no, don't worry, you'll be all right, but not explaining to them how they're going to be okay when at that very moment they're experiencing some sort of physical, emotional, or mental pain, then you're setting them up for this statement. They'll never believe a word you say because they will know from experience that you can't be trusted. So they'll go looking for the truth on their own. And it'll be that child, it'll be that young adult, it'll be that young professional who will decide what the truth really is. And it may not be what you agree with, but it may be their truth. It may be their truth. And before I end the video, I'm going to do another part 2, maybe a part 3. I'll bring the book back. I want to show you guys something with regard to what's been discussed on YouTube regarding beyond the upper firmament. What is below is above. There's 70% water on the surface of the earth, 30% landmass, give or take, and presumably there's 70% water, some sort of fluid above the firmament. And I want to show you something based on my ongoing research and analysis regarding dark matter. Okay? Dark matter, from what I've been learning, going through a few webcasts and lectures with the Fermi Lab in several universities, and I've dove into the subject of black radiation, black body radiation, which I'll show you in the next video. But I wanted to show you a few slides because I'm leaning more towards the idea in the existence of dark matter, also known as dark fluid, existing in the upper firmament, which we call the blackness of space. Every interview you may run across with an astronaut describing what he sees, he or she sees, when they do an extravehicular activity, EVA, and they're out in space, they all agree that it's blacker than black. Now, we can't prove that there's liquid up there. There's some sort of fluid, but the fluid that's up there is dark matter, dark fluid. And that is what I believe we all see in the nighttime sky. It's just blackness. Yes, you see the stars, but they're at lower altitudes, rotating around the flat plane surface. But beyond that, 100,000 feet, with these balloon launches, you see nothing but blackness. Okay? And the blackness you see is a dark fluid. It's dark matter with the stars inside of them. Okay? Can't be seen. Let me take you to a sample of something that was created here on this earth by a company called Surrey Nanosystems. Now, I want to take you to a specific photo. I want you to look away for 10 seconds and then look back and ask yourself that when you first saw this photo, did you immediately interpret it as an empty spherical space inside the aluminum foil in this plastic see-through container? Or did you immediately identify that there had to be something, some sort of physical matter object inside this aluminum foil? Because when I first saw it for the first time, which was a couple of years ago, I immediately says, oh my God, they've created some sort of cloaking type of material that if you set it in the right background, you don't see anything. But let me tell you what this is. This is what is called Vanta Black. It is a material made out of carbon nanotubes, capable of absorbing all visible light at a rate of 99.96%. It is the blackest of black. It does not reflect. It absorbs 99.96% of all light. That's what this is. It's called Vanta Black. Here's some other photos of it. But there you go. And what you see here, if you'd have seen this for the first time, you would think that this was a redacted photo and they were hiding something behind it. No. It's Vanta Black cover over a gold-plated statue mask. That's what this is. That's what it is. That is what it is, people. So, we're going to talk about dark matter, dark fluid, in the next video. Maybe a couple of days from now, maybe over the weekend. And I'm going to try to get as much detail as possible to give you guys some visual frames of reference and videos I found discussing black body radiation. Because dark matter does not contain, absorb, reflect radiation. So I think I can explain why astronauts don't see any stars once they get above 100,000 feet. Because dark matter, dark fluid, performs exactly like this.